Hi, my name's Mike Booth. I'm a volunteer war graves guide with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. The Commission's charged with looking after all the graves of Commonwealth soldiers from the First and Second World Wars and commemorating those soldiers with no known graves. That gives us something like 1.7 million people to commemorate, not all of whom have individual graves. I'm here at Morpeth churchyard this afternoon, St Mary's churchyard, because I'm leading the first of two tours of the war graves in the week leading up to Remembrance Day on Saturday the 11th of November.
Tell us a little bit about the Morpeth war graves and perhaps some aspects which are slightly unusual or different.
Yeah, well, there are just over 100 war graves here in the cemetery at Morpeth. Most of them are in the plot that we're standing in at the moment, which is actually a war graves plot, and regularly the Commonwealth War Grave Commission staff will come and look after the plot, which is why it's looking very neat and tidy. But there are also a similar number of individual graves, what the War Graves Commission calls scattered graves, just dotted around the cemetery.
Now, Morpeth obviously has a large Polish community. Is there a particular reason why so many of the graves here at Morpeth are from people from Poland?
Well, that's an interesting question. There are a number of links with Poland. One that a lot of people will be aware of is that there was a Polish community actually on the common in Morpeth straight after the Second World War. There was a resettlement camp where Polish families were housed between about 1948 and maybe into the 1960s. A lot of them were military families, people who had escaped from Poland or were living in England and didn't want to go back to communist Poland after the war. There's another link because there was a war hospital nearby, Gallow Hall Hospital I think it was, which was used for a lot of Polish war casualties, and sadly many of the people in these graves are soldiers who were injured and then died in that hospital. There's also a link with the RAF Morpeth, which was used during the war as a training school for air gunners, and a number of Polish fighters, Polish airmen came over to Britain and flew planes that were used in the gunnery training, and sadly through accidents a number of them are buried here as well.
Now, I think this part of the cemetery, where largely the graves are of Polish personnel, are people from the Second World War, but is it the case that most of the others are in the older part of the cemetery?
Yes, there are a lot of First World War burials in the older part of the cemetery. The Commonwealth War Grave Commission was only set up officially in 1917 when it was the Imperial War Grave Commission, and so a number of soldiers had died before 1917 and they would have had private burials here in the cemetery, and then when the War Grave Commission was established they would have taken over caring for those graves.
And the tours that you're doing today, is this something that the Commission has done over a long time, or is it something relatively new?
The Commission's been doing tours for some time. A lot of people, myself included, associated the war graves with the large cemeteries in France and Belgium and across the world. And in fact, I used to take students on tours of France and Belgium looking at war graves before I realised I was living 200 yards away from this collection of war graves, because being right at the back of the churchyard, you really don't notice it unless you come deliberately looking for it. So the Commission decided they wanted people to be more aware of the war graves in this country, of which there are many, many thousands. And even in Northumberland there are something like 40 locations which have war graves, many of them just single or two graves, but some like Morpeth with a larger quantity. So they are encouraging people to take these tours and find out more about the graves which are literally on their doorstep.
Now, you mentioned earlier on there Belgium. I believe there's a particularly interesting grave in the older part of the cemetery dedicated to someone from Belgium. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. In fact, it is in this section of the cemetery, but not quite in the war grave plot itself. It's a man surnamed Duhem. I think his name was Eugene Duhem. He was a Belgian soldier, and when I first came across him I was interested because he's listed as someone who actually fought in Russia in the First World War for a Belgian brigade, but ended up being buried at Morpeth. And there's still a bit of a mystery behind that, but basically he was from a unit which really pioneered the idea of mechanised warfare. They had some armoured vehicles loaded with machine guns right at the start of the First World War, and then when trench warfare took over in Belgium and France, those machines were basically useless. It was before tanks had been invented. They didn't have proper tracks, they just had ordinary car wheels, and in the trench situation they were hopeless. But in the fighting in Russia, which was much more open, they might be useful. So they were actually sent over to Russia and Ukraine and fought there. Then the Russian Revolution broke out and they were trapped there, and eventually Duhem's brigade actually travelled by the Siberian Railway right across Russia, got a ship over to America, crossed America, got a French true ship back to France, and they had literally been all the way around the world. Now, how, amongst all that, Eugene came to be buried in Morpeth Cemetery is a little bit of a mystery. He did actually die in what's now St George's Hospital, which was then Morpeth Asylum. Died there towards the end of the war in 1918. But exactly how he came to be there is something I've not quite discovered yet.
Now, as time moves on and people tend to forget a lot of the dreadful things that happened during wartime. How important is the work of the Commission now, so far removed from the First and Second World Wars?
I think it's very important. It's important that people remember, obviously, the two world wars that Britain was involved in. It's something that in my lifetime I'm lucky enough not ever to have been called upon to take part in. I've never been told you must sign up for a war, but in the two world wars people were told that. They didn't all volunteer. There were some volunteers at the start of the First World War, but then later in the First World War and in the Second World War there was conscription. People had to join the armed forces, and therefore I think there's a particular duty for us to remember and to look after their graves, because they not only served their country, but they were actually told you must serve your country. And particularly with the centenaries recently of the First World War events, and things like the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings and so on, it is something that comes to people's mind more and more, and people are showing a lot of interest in it, I think.
And when would be an opportunity for people to join one of these tours in Morpeth in the future?
Well, I'm hoping that we'll have tours in the War Graves Week, which is during May next year, and then maybe again in the Heritage Open Days in September. I'm planning to run maybe 2 tours a week for those 2 weeks. But there's also an opportunity, if you're involved in a group, that you can book tours yourself through the Commonwealth War Grave website.